Alrighty, so XR design. I am super excited today to bring some of the research that I've been doing. A lot of the research that happens is collaborative. It's coming from the Immersive Media Lab space, but I also, just through osmosis, have been able to pull in a lot of this information. So today I'm going to talk about user experience, which I'm just assuming that all these topics, by the way, that you have like a general understanding. So there's going to be moments where you're like, yeah, Chris, I know. Uh, and I get that, but then there's going to be other things that I want to try to connect dots with. And so I always think it's good to have some sort of historical context and terminology. We're going to look at like the emerging narrative affordances of these spaces. We'll look at information design, user interface, user experience stuff, and then finally some Q&A. I put a timer for about 30 minutes. So, all right, why do I think this is important? I always start with why, right? Similar to the way that apps have incorporated new designs and new experiences throughout the history, extended reality or XR, these devices and these experiences are going to add whole new layers and new ways that designers are going to need to think about authoring and or designing experiences. And so that's the big part of this. As a slight aside, I remember I used to work at Blockbuster, and I'm aging myself a bit, but there used to be VHS arrays and then like DVD arrays, and we'd have to put the boxes right next to each other, and then eventually all the VHS went away into the sale bin, and then that same thing happened with DVD or with Blu-ray, and now Blockbuster doesn't even exist anymore. And so all of the design has to happen in those, like Netflix and Disney Plus and things like that. And so designers are there at every single stage, and this is one of those stages. We are before like the real total mass adoption of all of this stuff, in my opinion. So who am I? So some of you do know me. Chris Willey, lecturer in the first year program. That's where most of you have worked with me before. I'm the acting area head of digital studio practice right now. And then I direct the Immersive Media Lab. I'm also an Adobe education leader. So that last is just giving me access to the teams that work with the brand new programs. So like if something's up, I can literally call somebody, be like, hey, Photoshop isn't working. What's up? Can you help me with this? And it's pretty rad to have like that direct access to that. But I also get to take the things that I'm teaching and how I'm teaching them and bring them into the room with some of the best educators in the entire world. And then together we find good ways to deploy that. I would say that after sharing the 118 curriculum and the way that we're doing things with iterations, the team over at Adobe said, honestly, in the world, this is unique. There's no one doing it quite like you are, and we want to bring that experience to other people. So I think that was the big reason why, that plus what I'm doing in the Immersive Media Lab. So that's who I am. A little bit of the news and background there. User experience, UX. It's a wall of text. But basically what designers, and one of the things I really love about the DVC program from the outside looking in, is that you're taking into account the person's emotions and attitudes as they're using your design. And specifically UX experience it has to be practical. You can experiment with it. It's effective. It's meaningful. There always is this consideration of the human-computer interaction. Like, how is this happening in this space? And I should say human-computer, when I'm specifically thinking about virtual and augmented reality, yeah, it's a direct relationship. And then, we get some feedback from it. One of the really cool things that's starting to happen with like Adobe Enterprise is you get heat maps, you get direct feedback on, like, you deployed a website, you now have 10,000 iterations of that. You can see where people are stopping, clicking, using, and then you can redesign based on that user experience. I think that's pretty cool, and that's not something I grew up with. Speaking of growing up, like I said, I think it's important to see the historical context here and to see how things are evolving over time. And what I'm specifically looking at is operating systems today, because I'll get into that. And then I also want to look at like web and internet user experiences. So we'll talk about the PROSPECTION bit here, but all of this leads to where things might be going. But when we look at this stuff, what I'm wanting you to do is to really look at what is getting appropriated from one generation to the next. So we're going to look at OSs and websites from like 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll look at 4 as well. So Kim, I suspect me and you both have fond memories of the first graphic user interface. I remember that I didn't even think twice about what these things were. I just understood that a folder, you put stuff in, a file, like a piece of paper, was what goes in the folder. There was some nice mapping from like printer and like you can see with the print manager and control panel. For those of you who understand how to play Minesweep, I still have respect for you. I never really learned. I think, Ryan, you know how to play it. I never figured it out. I think that says more about me than it does about anything else. And then first websites, right? So this is, looks like Internet Explorer, Netscape Navigator was around there too. But I just pulled this from the internet, and I think one of the things that's funny is if your browser doesn't support images, we have a text menu as well. And I think what's important about that is look at what's happening here. We're basically putting clip art on a Word document, and then that's the internet in 1.0 in like 96 or 97 when this first came out. I think I pulled this from a 1997 because I tried to keep things somewhat similar. But again, look at the user interface. Look at what hasn't ever really left. So we move forward probably to the stuff that you had when most of you were growing up. I'm going back and forth between Windows and Mac, doesn't really matter. But again, we see that desktop metaphor. We see some things that haven't left, like the menu bar, the icons that are representing or substituting bigger, more rich experiences. But then you start to see some of the consistency in the design aesthetic. Same year, 2007, this little bad Mamma Jamma came out, and it changed everything. It just did. So I think something also to pay attention to is what and how that changed. Again, I suspect everybody knows all this, so I'll be brief. But we have these apps that we can now access anywhere in our pocket, and we can start to connect to people anywhere in our pocket. And that just changed the whole user experience. Now we had people who were like always glued to their phone, are always glued to their phone because there's just such a rich amount of data that can come at us with this. But also look at the design. We have the rounded rectangles, the skeuomorphism of like that notepad that looks real. This is some of the original conceits of the iPhone designers, is that they wanted it to be somewhat real. And then a website circa 2007. I like double checked to see if this was really the design in 2007 because it looks older. But yeah, this actually checks out. Some of the things that are new here would be the buttons across the top for the menu. Also starting to get to like live stream video. But there's the connection of the world. Like there was much more of an understanding that this was a worldwide thing. And I think that was interesting. The other part of this is now we start to get usernames and logins as a big part of the internet experience, and that just wasn't there originally. So now we're here. This is today. This is the very most recent build of Windows OS X or OS 10 version 19, I think it is. And we can see the icons haven't gone anywhere. But they've gotten smaller, and everything is tried to get pushed to the sides. And so that way your actual activity can be front and center. That desktop metaphor never left. Everything is still flat and fairly static, and there's doors and corners everywhere. So like I can pull these menus in, I can click on this button and get all these other interactions. But it's all kind of like rote at this point. We all just know what to do with these things. I also pulled the latest update, OS 14. We see that we've moved far away from skeuomorphism, and then also the simplicity and like the elegance has kind of started to go by the wayside for utility, in my opinion. I feel like a lot of these apps are visually overwhelming. Like there's just so much going on with this thing, that when I design stuff on my phone, when I move things around, I just keep like a single row of things across the top, so that way I know it takes a couple more spreads, but I can focus in on the one thing I'm looking for, rather than having all of these different tools buzz me and say, hey, look at me, here's this notification. And so I think that that's interesting as well, to start thinking about these things as, and this is coming directly from a recent documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. So a tool doesn't ask to be used or to look at. But in this case, all of these apps are vying for your attention. In fact, if you're not paying attention to them, they'll send you a notification and have you pay attention to them. And I think that that's interesting, that that's a part of the user experience that we as designers have to consider while we're going through things. And then I put the most recent Android build up. They are, this team is working more towards simplicity and elegance, whereas this team seems to be like, let's throw everything in the kitchen sink in. We'll see. I'm not a fan of one or the other. It's a tool, right? It's a toy. Which one do you need to use, and which one are you connected with? That's really what matters to me. And then I threw the just recent web trends. I googled that, pulled a screenshot of this. And so, again, we see the menus across the top. We see, what we don't see here is all the bootstrapping and being able to be on different websites at different times. But what I love about it is, now designers are here. Like really, truly, fully, we're thinking about how these things aesthetically connect. Where's the substance? There's hierarchy. There is something more than just, a graphic image on a Word document. And that's been primarily the job of graphic designers, is to bring their skills, their aesthetic, their experience to these new places. And so now we're getting to, I don't ever think that'll go away, but now there's new things that are coming up. This is Oculus, and then there's two different versions. There's one from 2017 and there's one from 2020. I'm just going to very briefly play those. Okay, about halfway through. This is 30 seconds, so I'll just let it go. This was a big deal before. They were using this kind of home aesthetic where you were like on a back patio in this fantasy land, and that's how you accessed everything. So this dash is the first time where there was, in my experience, some sort of user interface that was mapped to the space. And the first thing that I want you to see with this is notice how it's still flat. The only thing that they've done is they've curved the surface. And so I think that that's interesting in terms of there's so much that was appropriated and remixed and then brought into the virtual space. But there's so many more opportunities here. This is the 2020 updated version of this, and you'll still see in here that they're now you're not tethered. You also don't have haptics, things in your hands. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But you still are in this office space where you see in the background there's like that black and white image. That's something called pass-through, so you're not like completely vulnerable. But there's that curved interface, and then the curved kind of stacking of all of the color stuff, which is your actual office space. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. Typing in this space is a little bit of a pain in the keister. Oops. Just because they don't have a really great keyboard interface yet. It's amazing to me, but we're still kind of working on it. So they've made ways to have the actual keyboard in like the VR space, but it has to map exactly to your other keyboard, otherwise it just doesn't work. So this is some of the UI that you're seeing in virtual spaces now. And again, the main thing that I'm seeing here, it's all flat. It's all remediation. Like we're literally taking from what we know and putting it in this space. And I think that's one of the things that I would like you to kind of walk away from today is stop thinking about it that way. All right, so OS and Web 4.0. This is an older image. I think it was done in like 2000 aughts. I don't know. But the assumptions of like the web of thoughts. We are at the Internet of Things. The web of things did actively actually happen, but then anything beyond 2020, I don't know. And I think that's an important thing that we talk about here. This idea of prospection, not like introspection looking inside or retrospection looking behind, but prospection looking ahead. I caution it, right? Anybody who says to you, I know what the future is going to be and this is what it's going to be, they've either sold themselves something or are trying to sell you something. But either way, there's a delusion at play here. And you need to be technically savvy enough to be like, neat. That said, there are things that you can think about. Look at what's happening. Look at what everybody's doing, everybody's using, and then assume that that's going to continue. People are going to keep needing to connect with each other. People are going to keep needing to procure things. And then anticipate evolution in those areas. And then insert yourself if you think you can. I think that is a good way to think about the future. It's what I tend to do in the Immersive Media Lab. And then also try not to think about technologies as this linear thing, that it's only going to be this, this, and this. Technologies are, at this point, it's like a big explosion. And there's like 3D printing over here. There's machine computer, like brain computer interfaces over here. There's virtual reality over here. There's Web 5.0, or sorry, like whatever the 5G network is. All of these things aren't this linear progression, like this happens and this happens. No, they're all happening simultaneously. So I think as a designer, it's good to be aware of the emergence of something new. Like there's enough energy that people are writing about it. It's also good to think that that thing is going to continue to evolve the more people adapt it. And then lastly, think about how these things are going to combine. Like brain-computer interfaces and 5G, what would happen in that formula if you started putting those two things together? Where can you insert yourself? And again, that would be maybe folly, because who knows what the adoption rate of those kinds of things are going to be. But it's important to think about it that way instead of, well, I'll just wait for the next thing in one line. I think having your head on a swivel when it comes to technology is better than having this crystalline focus towards one thing. And I guess the main thing about that is try to imagine if you were in the 60s predicting 2000s, we didn't have the internet yet. Like there was no internet. So there is a potential of a behavior or a system that comes along that literally changes everything again in our lifetime. I'm not sure what that would be. But then the last thing I would say with this is sustainability has to be front and center. Like just because we can, should we? And what are the potential constraints that we need to add to this thing that we're designing that will help ensure the success of as many systems as possible when it's deployed. I think that that's something that's really lovely that I see coming out of the DVC program right now, is that there is a huge focus on ecology, like the systems, and then community and communication and empathy. I have such respect for what you all are going through. All right, terminology. XR. Some of you know this stuff, some of you don't. Just going to kind of suss it all out for you right now. The XR, extended reality, is the umbrella term. It catches virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. And now virtual reality, this is the newest thing, the newest shiny thing that just came out, which is the Quest 2 from Oculus. I'm going to be the first to say, I don't think virtual reality is like where it's at. It's expensive. It's difficult. You have to be technologically savvy. You're super vulnerable. You still can get sick. I think those are the big ones. However, the affordances of that space is that you can author an experience, design an experience that is directly what you want your viewer to have. Now, the assumption is you can't think the way that they're thinking, but you can really direct their eye and have them look and focus at a thing. And what we're seeing, and it might be because of the novelty of this technology, is that if you have any kind of advertisement that goes on inside a space, the actual behavioral tractability, so when they go back and they check, did you actually change your behaviors based on this experience, is it blows every other kind of media out of the water, period. Now granted, might be novel, might be a smaller subset, but still, like the fact that you can design something and that you have something on the order of above 2/3 of your people who participated activated through the way you want to have them be, like, change their behaviors, that's incredible. That is, in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like that. So there's problems with VR. There's also some interesting things that VR allows. AR, this is augmented reality. I forgot to change that down there at the bottom. Adobe Max is happening right now. I'm sure you all talked about it. Adobe Aero just released its desktop version, so now you can publish and make augmented reality experiences right from your desktop, put them onto any kind of device, and then people can start to experience them. This is all still so new. There's so many opportunities that you can get with augmented reality that frankly are niche and novel and unexplored. The issue right now is that it takes more steps, both technologically and as a consumer, to actually have these experiences, and so a lot of people aren't putting them in. However, I assume that when the wearable of glasses becomes more ubiquitous, everybody's going to be starting to think about augmented reality. So we'll move on from here. I know I'm kind of ripping through this real fast. I got two more, and then I'll see if there's been any kind of comments in the chat. Mixed reality. This is from Magic Leap. Mixed reality is where the information that's in front of you is actually interacting with your environment. That first image I showed, we have this little robot that is completely occluded in space. Like, there's no environment around it. The AR, the robot is just in front of it. It doesn't interact with space. In MR, you've done a spatial map. So that LiDAR on the new iPhone 12 is really, really important for this, because you create these depth maps with that technology, and now you can start to occlude things. So you can see that this little robot is actively behind the couch, which means the experience is in your same, like, world. And so that's where the mixed reality part comes in. The last one here would be WEB.XR, and this is the easiest and fastest way to get to have somebody have any kind of extended reality experience, because they don't need a pair of goggles, they just need a phone, and then they can start having these extended reality experiences that are all brought to you through JavaScript and HTML5, and there's one more component, but it doesn't really matter. It's very, very technical, kind of high-end web dev coding that's happening here. So I'm going to just stop for a second before I keep going. Has there been any kind of questions or chats that need to be addressed real fast? Sure. If not, I got more. Sweet. Yeah. So this terminology is kind of niche. Often when people would talk about VR, like the Gear VR, it's just like a bubble, a 360 video where wherever you look, you see it. So a lot of people's first experiences were VR were like, this is what you're talking about? This is not that cool. And I get that. The next step would be like having that experience, but then also having parallax, so that I'm in an experience that has been authored in a game engine like Unity or Unreal, and then the user, when they're in that space or having their phone or glasses looking in that space, as they look around, the environment shifts for them. And so 3 degrees would be you can roll your head, look up, down, left, right. 6 degrees, now I can start to move my body physically and have all of the other things that I have for 3 degrees. So there's a lot of affordances of brand new experiences with this. One of the really cool things that I think happens is you get to experience stories in a brand new way. And as a user experience and a designer, it's super important to think about this stuff in terms of a story. And I'm going to talk about this here in a little bit, but notice where the viewer is inside this story. This was built in one of the game engines. It's a full-on narrative. It has it has really top-notch actors, and you go through this whole story, and it's powerful. And there's a moment where, spoiler alert, where you kind of start to drown, and it feels really exhilarating. It's effective. I felt like I was there, and I think that that's an interesting thing, and it's all part of that 6 degrees of freedom. I'm now a participant in a story, but I'm not actually changing anything. So it's this odd kind of third person ability. And so that's something to think about when we come to design. The next is this thing called pass-through, and I showed you that with the Infinite Office, where you could see the stuff in black and white behind it. That's only going to get better. And the way that I think this will evolve, and I don't know, but the way I think it'll evolve is that we'll have glasses that will be augmented typically, that there'll just be a stream of information coming in. How many steps did you take? How many calories were in that 6th slice of pizza or whatever? And then if you want, you can switch it so that it actually maps your environment, and then you can have this Infinite Office kind of feel. And if you want to get to work, you flip it again, and now the environment goes away, and you're now in a space that you're not really worried about scale or time. You're just you and the information. And that's where the idea of being immersed in information comes from. So pass-through is important. The other one that I think is really important for designers today to really consider is haptics. And this is super important for human-computer design, but thinking about how you can design experiences where the kind of feelings of the actual experience helps dictate the feedback that you give your inhabitant or user that's going through the authored experience. And we think about some of this stuff right now, but it just changes exponentially when we start thinking about immersing the person in an environment, about having the environment be mixed with things that are in the real world and then things that are just getting displayed in front of them. And this is still growing. There's something called persistent anchors. This is coming from Google, and it's attaching to Google Maps. And so anywhere you go, if you're looking through the world through a specific window, you'll get designed experiences like this, where you see the pass-through happening, and then some author, artist has created an experience that you can now have that's on top of the real experience, and that persists in the real world. So I think that's going to change things too, in terms of getting engagement with whatever thing you want your inhabitant of your experience to engage with. You can really point things out within a real environment. Okay, so now we'll get into where some of the design stuff comes in. The main thing for me is storytelling, right? Everything that I do is about stories, because stories are data with a soul. That's Brené Brown. But they also are really important bits of information that we move from one generation to the next, and it sticks. And so storytelling is the first and foremost thing that I think about with user experience. What's the story that I'm telling, and how does that story impactfully change the inhabitant of this story? And so there are some really nice emerging narrative affordances. There is a video. I'm going to share this whole presentation with you all so you can click through and you can watch this. But there, a couple years ago, Stanford hosted this event called MediaX, and Julia Sorlikoff talked at this conference and just laid down all of these brand new ways of thinking about blocking and your user experience. And I think it's just seminal if any of you are going to want to get into this kind of thinking. But instead of storyboards, you now have a three-dimensional spherical block, and then you have what the person's going to experience in foreground, midground, background, and you have to think about these things now. But then there's brand new kinds of stories. That Age of Sail is a participant passive story. I'm able to sit here and watch something third person, but I could have also been slightly changing something in the environment. So I could have said, like, if the character's looking for a candle, I could have found a candle and put it in there. I'm not part of the story. I'm just participating, but I'm like watching from the side. That doesn't really exist yet so much in the current media. Not really, not in an effective way. But the rest of the stuff we kind of we understand. So observant active, that would be like a cutaway in a video game. Participant active, that's the actual gameplay. Observant passive, third person, and then I just talked about that. Participant passive. There's just brand new ways to tell stories in this, and you're inside all of the information, the authored experience. All right, that's my shut up, but I'm still going, so we're gonna go a little bit longer. But I'll rip through these, and you'll be able to see these. I'm pulling the next two sections from Edward Tufte and Donald Norman. And Edward Tufte is an information designer, and he really pushes graphical excellence, which is, you give the viewer a ton of ideas within the smallest amount of space. You want to be able to just pack whatever your design is with information that's relevant, interesting, and it has some sort of accuracy to it. And I think when we are thinking about designing for immersive experiences, appropriating that and moving it right into that kind of world makes a lot of sense. Here's an example that I pulled just from the last election. It seemed appropriate. Or not last election, 2 elections ago. But the idea of remediation, it's something I bring up in 118. We move from one media to the next, but we are appropriating things as we go from that one media to the next. And then there's a moment where we stop appropriating new things, like old things, and we start inventing new things because of the space. And that's the thing that I wanted to kind of whisper in your ear right now, which is we're moving from things that are potentially flat, maybe animated, maybe clickable and interactive, to things that are dimensional. They're spatial, they're dynamic, and you have to interact with them. I can see this from all 3 directions. And so often right now we see things as a curve and it's an appropriate of a flat space, but we don't need to. In fact, as you start to design websites for the future, there's going to be that moment, I suspect, where you have your flat kind of, Web 3.0 look, but then you also have, if somebody's got wearables, you have a wearable experience, and maybe those 2 experiences talk to each other. Maybe they're separate experiences. This is for you all. You're in the driver's seat for that. I'm really excited, but you have to start thinking about it, in my opinion, the same way you think as an industrial designer. You have to think about the information the way that Donald Norman thinks about it. I'm not going to click through on this. This is just an example of, without any interface at all, what Google Earth in VR looks like versus what the real space looks like. Obviously, there's all sorts of weird stuff going on the top, but there's just so much rich graphical excellence that is accurate that you have without a single word being shared. And I think there's some affordances to that. This one I will click on. This is somebody who is, I'm sure you all are familiar with Award. But this website itself, I'm just going to go down here. There was a GIF, I believe. Whatever. Yeah, so the website itself is dimensional, and the information is presented. It's super dense. It's pulling from a metaphor of constellations. So yeah, I think that there's just so many new things, new affordances of this space that we as designers have to consider as we're considering the user experience that our inhabitants are going to have. Design remediation, again, this is the same stuff, but I'm pulling all of this from Donald Norman. And if you haven't read Design of Everyday Things, this is the Cliff Notes version of it. Your design needs to be visible. And so everything I say translate to, like, how would you make sure this is happening in like an XR space? Because that's what I do every day as I'm looking at things. How would that look in WEB.XR? Visibility, the more visible functions are the more likely users are going to be able to know what to do next. So it's just really obvious what to do. Feedback, this is also that haptics thing that I was talking about. It's about sending information back after an action has occurred to kind of verify. So there's a state change or there's some sort of like vibration or sound. All of that is critical to creating an XR experience. Mapping. So the mapping already happens, as we saw with the Google Earth, but now there needs to be mapping to UI. And I think something that is missing if we're constantly flat and maybe curved is, if I want to save something, why don't I have a bowl rather than like the save icon? Like, I just want to put this in a bowl and save it for later. So like there is an affordance now in this spatial design that you don't necessarily need all the old metaphors. That's going to be tricky to get people to see that, but that's the job. Constraints. So the scissors will only open up so wide, they don't come apart. These are also part of designing something for someone to use. The feedback is also could be a potential constraint. And then, I'm not sure if you all are familiar with this, Adobe builds all of their application on a platform called Spectrum, and I've just put a link to it. Spectrum, it looks a lot like Adobe XD. In fact, Adobe XD came from Spectrum. It evolved out of that. And so you see the design principles in play with the tools that you use every single day. And this is the Donald Norman's consistency bit. Like, everything has to match. And then what I love about what Adobe's doing, and sure, other people do this too, is that there's a rationale behind the consistency, that it's human focused and it's easy. So that would be the thing that I would think about when you're designing for this space, is where does the consistency of the inhabitant's experience come into play? So that's what I have for you all today. That's what I had time to prepare anyway. There's obviously so much more, but I think I'll just open it up to kind of questions now.